Welcome one and all. It's time for a red hot, spicy, tender and succulent Age of Sigmar battle report. Stormcast Eternals versus the FleshEater courts. The filthy, disgusting feasters themselves. So, let's dive right in. Boom. So, Krondys back in the action. And we're trying out, wildly experimental for me, 1 drop. Bum bum bum. So normally, I have at least 2 drops, if not more. I thought, why not try the old 1 drop? And if you're going to have 1 drop with anybody, why not Krondys, and then load up the rest of the list with some nice hard-hitting units that can benefit from his various debuff spells that he can use on the enemy. So, what have we got in there other than big Krondys? We've also got Vanguard Paladors with javelins, of course. Not entirely because that's the best choice, although I think it is, but also I just haven't painted the axes because I don't think they're quite as good at the moment. We have got maybe the least hitty of the units. We've got the Quester Soulsworn. We've got 6 Prosecutors. And we've also got 6 Grandhammer Annihilators. So not a lot of units. Some very hard-hitting units, particularly the Annihilators. And Krondys, with his various spells that he can dish out, for example, -1 to enemy save can be a big deal. Particularly for the Paladors, who have a lot of Rend 1. So they could really benefit from the extra Rend that comes from that spell. Or perhaps from a Purple Sun that Krondys can also summon up. And the thinking behind this is Krondys throws out those spells onto key enemy units, maybe hits somebody with a -1 charge dice spell to keep the enemy at bay so I can hit what I want to hit and not be bogged down in other units, and then throw everything in there. Hopefully their armor's been debuffed and just shred face. That is the plan. However, coming up against this particular list, the FleshEater courts, their armor saves aren't actually that good. So I don't know if that's going to be entirely necessary. You might just be able to yeet everyone in there, as the kids say, and destroy them without the armor debuff. So, we are on Battle for the Pass, which means that you have a home objective in your territory, and there are 2 objectives on the border between the 2. And you score big points if you control the point in enemy territory. If you don't hold that one, then you can't quite get the maximum points for each turn. So, ideally you want to get into the enemy territory. And we've got a couple of small places of power up at the top and the bottom there. And what is my subfaction? Oh yeah, it's the Bleak Citadel. So we're going to have a ward save on the Prosecutors for the entire game because they're the only unit that is eligible for that. And none of the other subfactions seem like they make a lot of sense for me with this particular list. If you can think of one that would be useful here, then let me know. But as far as I could tell, that's the only one that's going to help too much. So obviously, the Questors have to quest mark the enemy home objective. That's the only one that's in enemy territory and also not in friendly territory. So I think it has to be that one. So they are mostly going to guard my home objective, and then when the time comes for them to strike, they'll teleport across the table and then maybe get their 5+ ward save on the enemy home objective. Let's go through the evil FleshEaters list as best I can remember. So, we've got Big Bad Usharan, who is very scary, kicks several different kinds of butt, and has some strike last abilities which aren't very nice, especially if you're a unit of Prosecutors, for example, who really don't like going last because they just die because they don't have enough wounds. There is also a Decapitator, and yes, that is a hero's name that I do remember. And there are some regular old ghouls there. What are the regular ghouls even called in FleshEater courts now? Are they still just called ghouls? There's a big unit of 6 Crypt Horrors there. There is also, hanging out with them somewhere, there's a Vargulf. Where's the Vargulf? Would that be it there? Then we've got some Crypt Guard, which are kind of like the... As Graveguard are to a skeleton, Crypt Guard are to a ghoul. And then there's a unit of Morbeg Knights at the bottom there. So they haven't been deployed properly yet. Before I took the picture prematurely, they're supposed to be up here somewhere. So, this army of FleshEater courts do not have particularly good saves. They also don't have amazing stats in general, really. They do have some buffs they can use, but in general, it's the weight of numbers and they can come back to life quite easily. So they come back to life when the heroes build up noble deed points by casting spells or killing things or pretty much doing anything. They seem to accumulate the points very easily, and they can then cash them in to bring back a unit at half strength. So when I have the opportunity, I might try and leave units alive on just 1 or 2 models, if the opportunity arises. It's often tough to engineer those situations in the game, but until they die, they can't come back, obviously. So you don't necessarily want to finish off all the enemy units, because they can pop up, and they have to pop up by the table edge as well, which is, I think, unique to them. A resurrection ability that lets you come up at the table edge. So I can obviously bring 1 unit back at half strength. I don't have a lot of units, my opponent has more. I was thinking if I had Karazai in this game, he would very much like to get stuck into like the ghouls or the crypt guard, where he'd get 1,000,000 attacks with his tail. But it is Krondys, who's not bad in combat himself, but we'll be looking to the Annihilators and the Paladors to do some big damage, hopefully, against this big wall of somewhat rotting flesh. Okay, so because I'm only 1 drop, I am getting to choose who's going first, and I choose to give it away. My plan is to have the opportunity for a double turn and to not get doubled. So giving away the first turn, the enemy don't really have much in the way of shooting, and I don't think they've got anyone that can really threaten me early on. And also what I'm thinking is, if anyone does make a miraculous spring forward and reach Krondys, for example, the Paladors are right there for a countercharge, so they probably don't want to be hitting him just yet, in my opinion. So, turn 1 to the enemy. I also don't think I'd be set up to do any amazing battle tactics at this stage. I wouldn't want to drop down for a take their land, because there's loads of enemies near everything. Don't want to do seize the centre, because my units are too valuable to just sit there and then get doubled and murdered. Take the flanks isn't an option yet. And yes, I think giving away is the way to go there. Giving away the turn. So you can see where the Morbeg Knights actually end up deploying. My opponent goes for seize the centre first of all, which is a valid tactic if you've just got big tar pit units you want to just put in the middle, as long as they're not in combat at the end. And you can see that I've put that token down to show that this is the quest marked objective as well. I've countercast a purple sun out there, and my thinking here is that it'll deny big units being able to get all their meat onto Krondys, but if anyone does want to charge the purple sun and try and kind of slingshot around towards Krondys, the Paladors can then come in, and there's going to be limited enemies that can get past here, so I wouldn't be fighting as much, potentially. Also, I just want to have the purple sun up because I don't want to waste a spell on my turn casting it, because I've only got 2 spells to use per turn with Krondys, and he's got lots of really good ones, so you don't want to be casting a manifestation when you could have done it in the previous turn. And he's too far away to use any of his debuffs on the enemy yet. And even then, actually, the debuffs that you would use on the enemy, some of those you would want to be in effect during your turn, and it would go away at the start of my hero phase. So I want to save those, get the purple sun out there. So the enemy moving forward a bit, you can see one of the heroes, one of the foot heroes has gone onto the throne, where he can start amassing points. I think he gets some heroic or noble deed points just from standing on the throne, walking up the steps. And they're building up those points. You can see Usharan is already on 4, which obviously isn't very nice. I think they have to get up to 6 to bring a unit back to life. And the Crypt Guard and the Crypt Horrors are in the centre for take or seize the centre. So, what am I going to do against this horrible mess of critters? These 2 units here both put themselves within 18 of Krondys, so I can start launching out debuffs onto them. So I'll pick which unit I don't want to fight, try and put -1 charge dice on them. Then, I'm going to try and splat in and kill some of these units. Who do I want to kill? The ghouls, perhaps? And maybe the Morbeg Knights. I don't really want to get into the centre right now because all these units are very scary. The Knights on their own, not scary unless they charge. The Ghouls on their own, not scary. They're backed up by a couple of heroes. The Decapitator is actually quite scary if you have foot heroes, but I don't have any, so he's not that scary. He has some kind of auto-kill ability that also requires him to have damaged you, I think, possibly, and then it's still only on a 5+. So, as the ability was being described with these different hoops that you have to jump through, it was sounding less and less attractive of an option. So, 7 points scored after taking the home objective and one of the flank objectives and a battle tactic. 7 points. So, onto my turn. I go for Do Not Waver, so 2 units fight, no units die. So, I'm very confident that 2 of my units will fight this turn, because the Paladors are very fast. They can run and charge, so I'm going to send them after the Ghouls. I'm going to be able to maybe teleport the Prosecutors somewhere to fight, if I want. I've also got the Annihilators to come down, and I'm going to send Krondys in this sort of direction, along with the Purple Sun. The Purple Sun, I'm thinking of using that to lock down whichever unit I don't want to fight so they can't countercharge me, and then send Krondys into the other one. So, for example, ideally I'd want to hit these Knights so I can try and get them killed before they charge me, and then the Purple Sun would tie up the Crypt Guard. That's the dream. So let's see how it goes. Well, the enemy have countercast a barricade, which is going to hinder Krondys a little bit. And I've dropped down the Annihilators around the back. And the spot I dropped them in, let me show you on the wide shot. We go back there. So I dropped the Annihilators back here somewhere at the top left. I couldn't really fit them anywhere else that was attractive because there's this guy on the throne locking down various important locations. And you don't want to put them down behind a building. So I brought them down up here. My plan is to just splat in here, wipe out this whole blob, get rid of the heroes, get rid of the Ghouls, get rid of the Knights, and then just leave this horrible mess in the centre. And then they'll have to start splitting up, at which point I should be able to pick them off. That's the plan. So, the Annihilators got in. They did get to fight. They made their charge. I think I did have to re-roll it. And they murdered one of the heroes. The Vargulf, who was hanging out next to Usharan, countercharged the Annihilators and ended up paying a severe penalty for that by getting whomped with these hammers. So managed to get 2 heroes for the price of 1. There's just this one guy left now. What's his name? It is the Marrow something. Some kind of bone marrow dude, I think. And the Paladors got into the Ghouls, killed lots of those, as you can see. Still, some of my favourite models, these Paladors. I'm glad I spent a very long time painting them, because I think they're very attractive. And all the Ghouls eventually get killed. So, Krondys failed his charge into anybody, because this barricade was there, which was irritating. And I didn't actually roll very high on his charge, though, so I decided to just charge the barricade and fight that instead. I was hoping to get to the Knights. The Purple Sun did actually get into one of the units, but it got killed. I think I sent it into the Knights because I was going to send it here. You can see I put -1 charge dice in the Crypt Horrors, so I'm trying to limit what this blob of stuff here could do. And I was going to send the Purple Sun into these guys, into the Crypt Guard, but I think my opponent was down to 1 command point by that stage. So I think I then decided to charge the Knights instead, knowing that these guys could not countercharge. And then Krondys didn't roll high enough, had to kill the barricade instead. Questors still just biding their time on my home objective. Prosecutors also biding their time by the teleport chamber, waiting for the right moment to drop down and attack somebody. The Prosecutors aren't great for Do Not Waver because they don't have a lot of wounds in the unit and they can go down quite easy, even though in this game they're going to have a 5+ ward save the whole time. So, 9 points for me. I've gone into the lead. Oh, by the way, if I didn't mention the season rules, my opponent picked the Crypt Horrors, I think, to benefit from +1 to hit, +1 to wound against the enemy Honor Guard. And my Honor Guard are the Paladors who have the same thing. So if those 2 units fight each other, it's going to be a bloodbath. And my opponent had more drops, more regiments, so also picked on one of the infantry heroes the field sergeant, as it called, that gives you the extra movement. So that's why some of those ghouls were able to move quite fast early on. But most of them are dead over there now anyway. So at this point in the game, if I get the double, what do we think? Because I think a double here would be pretty much game over. So I've got my full strength army within striking distance of the enemy. Krondys is right there, the Palador's right there, the Prosecutors can be right there, the Annihilators are up there, they can get to about here, maybe get a charge in here. I think if I get the double, that whole pile of stuff there could evaporate quite feasibly. Ushran might live because he's got his strike last abilities to dish out to the enemy, so you never know with him, and that could just leave the knights and the tower. So, because this is just a friendly game, if I'd won the roll for turn 2, I think I probably would have given it away, because otherwise we could have had a very quick game here, because I think there's a lot of meat that looks very succulent there. But I did not win the roll off anyway, so my opponent chooses to take the turn, of course, and goes for take their land, and picks this piece of land at the bottom right, which is deep within my territory, and to take that, it'll be a requirement that one of the heroes builds up enough noble deed points to bring a unit back to life over there, and currently they don't have enough points. They're going to have to start casting spells to get up to 6, I think. But Usharan does his best. He ends up on 5, and I think there's a spell that puts a wound onto Krondys there. The Crypt Horrors are moving up towards the Paladors, so that's going to be a fun fight. And Usharan is heading for the Annihilators by the looks of it. His little mate, who was up there before, has run away though, wisely, just to cover this objective to stop me teleporting onto it. And the Crypt Guard and the Morbeg Knights are going for Krondys, who is looking a little bit lonely over there, and they swarm him. Now, Krondys, quite good defensively, not as good as Karazai, who can put -1 attack onto the enemy, but Krondys, he has got the ability to shut down commands on someone. So you're relying on his debuffs to make the enemy worse at hitting you, really. You can see I've put -1 charge dice and -1 to hit on the Crypt Horrors. So they're not going to be as good if they get into a fight. So that should save the Paladors. The Crypt Horrors do get in. Usharan gets in as well into the Annihilators. And at this point, it's clear that my opponent is not going to succeed with the battle tactic, because none of the heroes succeeded with enough of their abilities to build up enough points to bring a unit back to life, which is what would have been required to take this piece of land over here. The only other way of getting the extra distance would be something like a power through, but you're not going to be able to do that against Krondys because his wounds are too high. If anyone's watching this live, by the way, let me know. It's a little bit later than I usually start these things. You can never tell how big the audience is going to be for one of these live streams, because I've had some very late at night before that get an obscenely high audience number, and I think if I was doing them regularly every week guaranteed, I think there would be an audience built in, but it's a little bit sporadic because I don't always play a game at the club every week, but when I do, it's usually reported on, unless it's a game with kind of back-to-back activations that's hard to capture in photos, something like Star Wars Shatterpoint. We've got Lazy Titan, complementing the quality of the content, as one should. So all out defense to the Annihilators, because they get hit first, because Usharan actually fails to put Strike Last onto them. So you have to roll above their control characteristic, and manage to roll a 1. So the Annihilators were actually going to be able to strike other than last. So Usharan went first, I put all out defense on them, 3 of them are alive, which is a good number. And then Krondys kills quite a few Morbeg Knights as the next action, which is good, with all-out attack as well, because I wanted to get them heavily whittled down. The Paladors take a casualty from the Crypt Horrors. The Annihilators have a really poor round of attacks, actually, the 3 of them that remain, and only do 1 wound to Usharan, which is very sad. What kind of logo is that? Is that an Imperial Guardsman's helmet there? What it looks like. The Paladors kill some of the Crypt Horrors, so that unit is down to 3. And Krondys gets down to 6 wounds after the Crypt Guard have a go at him. But we know it's going to be my turn next, so I've got the option of flying away or staying there and debuffing the enemy with magic. I can always try to debuff them with magic first, and if that fails I can then move away, take the small hit on number of wounds, and then put something else in here perhaps to hold them up. Like the Questors, or the Prosecutors could splat in there, if I desperately want to keep Krondys alive. So we'll see how well the debuff spells go. That'll decide whether I want to keep him in there or not. I do still have Finest Hour to use on him as well, so that may well be time for that. So you'll notice there's a big space here now in enemy territory, which is a spot that the Questors would like to fill, because then they're going towards their favourite objective, which is the quest marked objective. They'll get a ward save on it, and loads of victory points as well if I hold that, so that's going to be juicy for them. So my opponent only scores 3 points because wasn't able to bring a unit back on this piece of terrain. Into my turn 2, I go for Slay the Entourage, so pick unit in the enemy general's regiment. I pick the Crypt Horrors. However, we find out that this is actually a flawed strategy. Here's why. So there's 3 of them, but the enemy have a spell that they can do a counter spell with, that it does a small number of wounds, I think it's D3. It does D3 wounds to a unit, so for example the Paladors, and then you can bring back 1 model for each wound inflicted to a friendly unit, which would mean Crypt Horrors coming back to life left and right, and the enemy subfaction is one that means you get 1 extra model when using abilities that return models to units. So the Crypt Horrors actually get up to full strength as soon as I announce that battle tactic. But that's why we've got the Prosecutors, so they drop down 9 inches away and fail their 3 dice charge. Wow, wow, wow. Uthran finishes off the Annihilators. The Questors drop down and fail their charge into the tower, which they wanted to hit, so that then they could trail back a couple of guys onto this objective and take that off the enemy. And I managed to get... I put Finest Hour on Krondys, put -1 to hit on the Crypt Guard, and that made me confident enough to stay there. I also had a spell, Lightning Blast. I killed one of the Morbeg Knights with that as well. So I knew I was going to go first, and I was able to kill a lot of the Crypt Guard, so I was quite confident I would live, and he only ended up suffering 2 wounds that turn, so he's got 4 left. And I'm quite happy, even if he ends up dying next turn or the turn after, he's tying up a huge amount of the opposing army, and they don't have much left outside of that area. I've still got some fairly big hitters alive over here. That's not a unit there, those are just corpses up there. So I only score 3 points because I failed to kill that unit. So that's something to consider. If you're going to target a specific enemy unit with a battle tactic, make sure you look into whether they have any spells that could bring those models back to life while they're in combat very easily. Don't think just because they're in combat they can't have their numbers swelled. So, I decide now is the time to take the double because I win the roll, and if we look at the state of play, if I don't take it, what's going to happen? I think Ushran gets in there and maybe kills the Paladors. I think Krondys probably gets killed by what's left here without Finest Hour, and maybe it depends if I get a counter spell debuff. So he could live the turn, could survive. But the enemy could bring a unit back as well, because you can see some of the characters are up to 6 noble deed points. They could bring a fresh unit of ghouls, maybe. Or if the Morbeg Knight gets killed, another unit of those at some point. And I am not on the big scoring objective, and the Prosecutors have somewhat abandoned this one as well. They're still in the vicinity, but I really want to take the double here, because I think I can kill off these guys. Kill off the Crypt Horrors quite easily. I think the Prosecutors will get in there. I think the Paladors will move away, shoot them, charge back in, shoot again, and then fight them. And I could bring in a fresh unit of 3 Annihilators as well for 1 command point, which I can use to attack maybe the tower. So, that's what I do. I take the double. Krondys manages to kill the final Morbeg Knight, puts -1 to hit and -1 to wound onto the Crypt Guard. So he's therefore able to survive on 2 wounds this time. So he's getting closer to death, but he's hanging in there. The Prosecutors do get in this time, and the Paladors, and with their combined might, the Paladors do take a casualty, I think, when they retreat from combat, but then they all get back stuck in there, and murder. I put Finest Hour on the Prosecutors as well, knowing they would surely make it in this turn, because I was only going to be 3 inches away with a 3 dice charge. The Annihilators drop down in the top corner, but they don't make their charge. The fresh unit of 3 brought back to life, so I've used that ability now. The Questors do get into the tower though, which means they've got enough people on this objective to take it from the enemy, because they get a bonus to their control score when they're on their quest marked objective, and there are 2 of them touching it. So I'm going to score 6 points, no battle tactic because I took the double, so I'm not allowed, but I quite like the state of play. It would have been nicer if the Annihilators got in and just whomped this tower to bits. But I'm feeling pretty confident, because Usheran's got a choice now. Does he go for this blob of death here, or does he go for the Questors who are on the enemy home objective? Because they're going to have a 5+ ward from being on this objective now. And what are the enemy going to bring back? They're going to try and bring back something that's going to be near this objective, surely. So at this point, I'm thinking, actually, maybe putting the faction terrain, my teleport chamber right here, isn't the best choice. Because enemies that are maybe landing in the vicinity can use that as a charge target and then trail off onto this objective. Whereas if you have it all the way down in the corner, the enemy wouldn't be able to do that. So I'm thinking maybe that was a bad idea. So into the enemy turn, after I scored the 6, my opponent goes for attack on 2 fronts, so take 2 objectives, one of which was held by the opposition. So we've got 3 Crypt Horrors back to life after the unit was wiped out. And then we've also got 3 Morbeg Knights back to life over here, and an ability allowed them to then move a small amount once they arrived on the table as well. So they're going to be able to charge the faction terrain and then trail off onto the objective, as I just said. Ushran and his little matey here, which I think is the Marrow... what's his name? The Marrow Priest, something like that. Those 2 want a piece of the Questors. And, well, his little friend rolls a double 1 on the charge, twice. So he really did not want to get involved. The Morbeg Knights get onto the objectives, so they're going to get some good points there. Krondys gets killed this turn by the Crypt Guard, despite -1 to hit and wound being on them. And Usheran gets into the Questors, but isn't able to kill enough of them, so I'm still holding this objective. With that ward save and all-out defense. They're good at holding on to their home objective. It's a good role for them because they have a good, healthy amount of wounds for the points that you pay for them. They're quite efficient that way. And they're more comparable points per wound to, let's say, like your Liberators or Vanquishers. They're closer to that end of the scale, I think, than the Annihilator end of the scale in terms of points per wound. So they're quite efficient there. They can do some decent damage, and they have their own teleport ability. So I think Questor's just a good unit. Every time I think about dropping them from the list, I think, what could I put in for the same points that would do as good a job as them? And I struggle to think of anything. Okay, so my portal takes a few wounds in combat. Nothing to worry about yet. So we're down Krondys, but we've still got the Paladors, we've got the Prosecutors who haven't been touched yet. And we've still got the lead as well slightly in this game. Got the Annihilators lurking up there as well. You can see the Crypt Horrors failed their charge when they came down as well, or when they came on from the edge. So my opponent scores 6 as well, so I've got a slender lead at the moment. Who's going to go next? I get the priority in round 4, so I go for Slay the Tyrant. So you have to kill an enemy hero by a combat attack. So I feel very confident about that, because as you can see, I splat everything into combat. Despite the appearance of this barricade, I'm still able to reach a charge into the tower with the Annihilators. Paladors, Prosecutors, Questors, all fighting Usheran, but there's also this little hero here. So if I haven't damaged Usheran sufficiently with shooting by the time I get there, and I don't feel like I can kill him, I'll start directing attacks on this little hero instead. So I should be able to kill at least one hero. Finest hour on the Questors as well. Usheran actually puts strike last on most of these units. But the Annihilators, when they pile in, they didn't have strike last on them, so they were able to whomp him. I think the enemy actually had got to strike first here, though, because of an ability as well. It might be triggered from this guy, Mr. Marrow Pants, which meant loads of the Prosecutors got killed. But you can see Usheran gets killed, his little mate gets killed, and it's looking very good. 10-point turn for the Stormcast. Even though I've abandoned my own territory utterly at this stage. And in the enemy turn, you can see that my opponent has gone for take the flanks. So the Crypt Horrors are hanging back, and the Morbeg Knights are hanging out there as well, or they will be in a moment. Then the Crypt Guard are just moving onto that objective and just consolidating their position there. So, I'm not sure how I feel about take the flanks in this situation. On the one hand, I don't think the Crypt Horrors have a chance against this ball of death here. I think I've got too much hitting power and staying power with the superior armor saves that I have. So I don't know whether splatting themselves in there would have been helpful. The Morbeg Knights are doing a good job holding this objective. I don't have any teleports left though, because I teleported the Questors using their own ability on the same turn that the portal teleported the Prosecutors, so I don't have a way to teleport back there. I've already brought a unit back to life. Paladors could potentially get there, but I think the Morbeg Knights and the Crypt Horrors obviously are some of the big hitters. So they're obviously looking to try and just start scoring battle tactics now, rather than trying to engage. Because I think all my units are very nice and compact, so I think in a straight up fight, maybe they would come out the wrong end of it. But there are the Crypt Guard there as well, so it wouldn't be that one-sided, I think, depending how many of them arrive and when. But as soon as you commit to doing take the flanks, then you're basically saying that these three units are never going to support each other again. So it's a risky move to go all out for that battle tactic. We'll see how it goes. The Crypt Guard decide they're going to go in though. They don't drag anyone else into combat, so they're just fighting the Questors. But with a bit of all-out defense, they survive quite well, and then hit back quite well also. And the Annihilators knock down the tower this turn. So is this guy the Abhorrent Ghoul? This guy, Abhorrent Ghoul King, perhaps? I can never remember the names of all the individual foot heroes in this game. So, my opponent scores 10 points as well, still holding my home objective, and yeah, this guy's not been, or he's been nudged out of his actual position, but you can see it's been measured to see where he's supposed to be, so the unit can actually reach there. So, it's actually very close. I still have the lead though, and I get the priority in round 5 as well. So what am I going to do with, we got a wide shot. Kind of, because that's a bit outdated now. So what am I going to do? I'm going to try and make sure I've got enough objectives. I just need to score 10, and that's going to be enough to win the game. So, what am I going to do? Let's find out. Take their land. So that should be very easy. The Paladors is just going to take that. The Annihilators and the Questors are just going to try and finish off the Crypt Guard and hold this objective. And that should be 10 points, because I'm holding the enemy home objective, I'm holding this one still, and I've got a battle tactic, so 10 points. So I can't be caught now, so we'll see how close the enemy can get to me. And my opponent in round 5 goes for Slay the Entourage. So kill, pick a unit in the enemy general's regiment, picks the Questors, I think, because everyone's in the enemy general's regiment in my army, except for the Annihilators, because they're a freshly resuscitated unit, if you will. And you can see the Questors do not end up dying, which means that's a failed tactic, but there are some objectives scored. So 6 points for the enemy, so it's a win for the Stormcast, and I think this list did pretty much what it was supposed to do. Krondys ended up tying up quite a lot of the enemy's forces for an extended period of time, without any ward save, by the way, because I didn't bring him any Praetors in this list. The Paladors, the Annihilators, the Prosecutors all managed to hit quite hard against the mediocre armour of the FleshEater Court. Against more heavily armoured foes, I would have been really trying to focus my attacks and using Krondys to debuff the enemy armour with his spell and with the Purple Sun. But that never really came up, because the enemy's saves just weren't very good anyway, so even with my mediocre rend of 1 on most of my weapons, on the Paladors and the Questors and the Prosecutors, they're all -1, then the enemy were down to 6+ saves, and then their ward saves. So I didn't feel the need to debuff their armour too much, so I was mostly throwing out debuffs to hit and wound, which is what kept Krondys alive for so long, considering he was on his own down here. Which did allow the big hammer units in my army to just chomp through everything else on the way down. The double turn was obviously a big deal, getting the double of 2 into 3, I think. because I was able to take out a couple of key enemy units. In some ways, my aggression did allow the game to become closer because I gave up my home objective in the midpoint of the game by teleporting all my units away from it. So if I was building this list again, would I consider taking out one unit and putting in two smaller units, cheaper units, for battle tactic purposes? Because if I'd kept someone near this objective, maybe not put my faction terrain so close to it, then that would have limited the enemy's ability to take it. That's something to consider, because I don't really have any units that can just sit there and not do anything, except the questors, but they prefer to do that on an objective in enemy territory, because then they'll get their ward save if it's their quest marked one. We've got Fat Lawyer in the chat. Good evening. Agreed, the Quest of Souls 1 points are very good. Yes. Questors. One of my favourite units at the moment. I've been using them a lot, and I kind of miss them when they're not there. The free teleport is very, very handy. It allows you to either do 2 teleports at once, or allows you to teleport them with the portal, and then still have a teleport later on in the game, which is one of the teleports that you can use to get out of combat as well. So very, very useful for late escape and late battle tactics. And then, as far as I can tell, if you bring back a fresh unit of 3 questors when they die, then they also have a teleport. Because I believe the abilities reset in those situations, because it's considered a fresh unit. So it's just good value. And what would I consider switching, though? So the prosecutors, I do like them. They're very fragile, and they need to be hitting first, which isn't a great combo unless you take them with Annihilators, because if you then roll high enough on the Annihilators, you can issue Strike Last to the enemy. So that means you can have multiple units going first, because Annihilators really want to go first as well, because each one of them that you lose takes away a huge bit of damage you could be doing to the enemy. Prosecutors are just too fragile, so have to go first. Paladors are really good at not striking first, because they're shooting, and they're shooting on the charge, means they've already done a good deal of their damage before they even get to fight. So they're quite a good combo with Prosecutors and or Annihilators. The Prosecutors, though, I could split them up into 2 smaller units and use them for battle tactics and hero sniping, because a unit of 3 is, in some situations, better than 6 at sniping out enemy heroes, because you can use that big 3-dice charge, get into small spaces in between the enemy units by flying, and then strike first and whomp the small enemy heroes, the little foot heroes with like 5 wounds, hit them, or stab them with your javelins. So maybe splitting up the prosecutors into 2 units. I think, though, I'm already at the limit for the number of units in a regiment, so I might have to look at other changes as well. The Annihilators, I don't know if they have a particular synergy with this list, because they already have good rend on their own. They don't need Krondys to help with that. They're just a good, reliable damage unit if they make their charges. And they're around about the same points cost as the long strikes at the moment, if not a little bit cheaper. So I think Annihilators are coming slowly back into fashion, actually. Long strikes have got more expensive, and they're very fragile, of course, but they do go well with units that want to hit first in combat, because they're not going into combat. They do all their damage in a totally different phase. So maybe Prosecutors, Annihilators, and long strikes can all work together. The one drawback with Krondys is that he's more expensive than all the other big dragons, so you're missing out on points elsewhere, but it also means you don't need to bring another wizard. So you're saving points on that potentially as well. Other wizards do have cool abilities, though. So there's just so many options for the Stormcast, and I own quite a lot of them. I've even got some Stormdrake Guard that I haven't painted yet, because I'm doing other painting projects right now. But it seems like you can't fit everything you want into 2,000 points if you have a massive Stormcast collection, like most of us probably do. Any of us that have been playing since 1st edition. So we've had like a decade of building our Stormcast armies, and every edition they get like an entire new army's worth of stuff. So even if you don't get all of it, you still end up with a vast variety of different units. And even the ones that get retired, they'll still be able to stand in and proxy as different units. So we'll see. When they shave out some of the units, maybe they'll actually put their attention where it needs to be and reduce the points on certain units that don't get any play, like Bastion, for example, who isn't actually that bad, but I think he's still managed to be too expensive for the last 3 or 4 years, which is impressive. And visibly Riley seems to be in agreement with me, yes, that you get your abilities when you come back to life, so that's just an extra bit of value you can get with the Questors. The issue with using them as the unit you bring back is that they are quite a bit cheaper than other units you could be using it on. So you're bringing less points back onto the table, but you're also bringing that extra bit of utility back onto the table as well. And obviously when you bring them back to life, you can drop them down anywhere. You do miss out on having a quest-marked objective, I think, then, because I think that ability is in the deployment phase, so the fresh unit wouldn't be able to pick one. That's the only thing you miss out on, so you wouldn't get their ward save, but you do get the teleport. Okay, I think it's about time to wrap this one up. So I'm very much enjoying Stormcast. Since I did the Paladors, it's kind of rejuvenated the list building process, and it's been fun. I didn't particularly miss the Vigilors actually in this game, so maybe they're not necessary. It felt like I was doing good damage without them, and it is a blob of points that don't actually do that much damage themselves, they just buff other units. So, the command points, I didn't really run out hugely, but again though, I always forget to leave a command point for powering through with the Paladors. Not that they would have been able to use it that much in this game, but it is nice to strike and then get out of harm's way with them afterwards and do a bit of damage on the way. But I always forget to keep a point for it, and when I do keep a point, I forget that there's a limit on which units you can actually do it to. You need to have a greater health characteristic than they do in order to even be able to do the ability. Also, I haven't been doing much counter-charging, so that saves points. Not much covering fire either in this list, because it's mostly short-range shooting, and the enemy are usually not that close, so not a lot of covering fire. So I didn't really feel a lack of command points in this game, so the Vigilors wouldn't have helped that much if they were in there. I would like to try all the dragons in the world in the same list one day, but I don't own enough models to do that. I would have to get a dedicated Karazai model, and who's the other one? Ionis, maybe? He's on a dragon. I think you can run all 4 dragons. I'm sure you can. I think Ionis is considerably cheaper than the rest, isn't he? And the others are all average about 500 points-ish each, so you could run all 4 of them, I think. I'm sure someone's already done that out there. You're basically running a very fast Sons of Behemat list at that stage, aren't you? Okay, what is coming up on the channel? As I observe my diary here, my little tournament diary. So, the next Stormcast action at a tournament is likely to be at the end of this month. So there may well be another game before then, we shall see, but tournament coming up end of the month. Before then there is a Star Wars Shatterpoint event, which should be very exciting. I don't know whether there'll be any coverage on the channel, because it's one of those games where it's activation by activation with lots of complicated abilities on stat cards, and then putting effects onto enemy units a lot, and it's difficult to capture it all with photography and then describe it. Without having a dedicated cameraman following me around, it might be a difficult game to do kind of blow-by-blow coverage of. And what else have we got? We've got an Old World event after that as well. And then in April, there's also Kings of War coming up, so lots of different game systems, lots of painting to do for all of them. It's a never-ending painting queue in this room. The army I'm painting now is actually my top secret Old World project, which is an army consisting entirely of models released 1998 or earlier, nothing after 98. So people can look forward to seeing that at some point. As far as new Age of Sigmar armies go, technically my Caradron Overlords are not new, I've had them for years, at least the infantry. And one day, I'll actually finish painting the big ships and get them on the table. I'm kind of in painting beast mode the last few months, so I feel like soon I will paint the big ships and then I can actually put them on the table. maybe when their new book comes out. And hopefully they'll have amended their rules by then as well, because they had a massive improvement this edition, the KO. Massive improvement being that the models actually go onto the gaming table now. You spend hours painting an army, and then previously you would just leave them on a tray on the side of the table and they would fight from within the ship and die from within the ship. Whereas now they kind of do a series of hops around the table using the ship, which is much better because they stay on the table. But they have a weird mechanic with the way they retreat now. The way they redeploy and then pop out the boat again. It's really weird, and it's like a crutch for the whole army, which is really bizarre and doesn't really fit with the way the game is played, but it's kind of necessary because I don't think they're that good otherwise. So hopefully they'll get quite a bit of redesign in their dedicated book when that comes out, and then maybe I'll be inspired to finish painting the big boats. We've got a fat lawyer who says, I joined very late, so I'm going to go back and rewatch. I'll try to catch you on the Discord. Yes, if anyone's not in the Discord, feel free to drop in there. I'm usually keeping an eye on that anytime any comments trickle in. And good evening to Michael as well. We're just wrapping this one up now. So, anyone who's just arriving late, obviously you've got to go and watch the replay to find out what happened in the one-drop Stormcast Eternals. Might be the only time I've ever done that. I like to bring a lot of heroes usually. So, Krondys and Pals versus the FleshEater Courts. Let me know what you thought about the list, what you think about any potential changes to the list, any units you would like to see in there that you think combo well with the other units that I have. Any thoughts on the FleshEater Courts as well, and that particular list. As long as it's not just bring more big knights, because everyone already knows that. And don't forget to check out all the social media shenanigans in the description and all the various fundraising down there. If you want to pay for me to attend more tournaments and buy more models, then why not pledge your entire life savings on the Patreon or the PayPal links down there. And with that, I think all that remains to be said is good night out there, whatever you are.